Today we're going to specifically focus in this presentation on the architecture technology roadmap, and towards the end we're going to have David and Victor Levy from Fab Lab here in Brussels, who are going to provide some expert feedback on what's going to be presented. As usual, it's things about visions and trends and weak signals and challenges and research recommendations that we'll discuss, just like with all the other presentations. The project actually interviews 60 expert participants over 2 years. Some of the faces there you can see are sitting around you, and it's their experts that we use to form this particular content for this document. One of the things that we'll talk about later is a live form of road mapping we did last week, where we had people, architects in one room in Fab Lab, and we gathered their opinions and got their visions and developed their trends and weak signals out of their comments using the road mapping process. And then we fed that back straight to them and checked, is this what you think is going on in the industry? And also, here are the pictures of the trends. How do you feel about these things beginning to emerge? You know, you have a sense that this is where things are actually going. So having the whole life cycle happen in one day, rather than done over 2 years, for example, was really valuable, because we could immediately see whether what we were doing was generating useful information that people could immediately act on as well. We took their views and, as I said, looked at the underlying trends and compared them, and then asked them to comment back, and that immediately told us whether this process was working or not. The visions that came out of the qualitative analysis of the architecture sector include these. People want architecture to actually provide more social benefit. They want more natural forms of building materials, as well as perhaps even synthesized materials, better modeling software, the ability to visualize better in 3D, prototyping, including 3D printing right up to house scales, is something that's beginning to become important. The actual production process of building things in itself needs its processes innovated on. It's not just about technology, it's about the way that you do things too. Very important to take a sketch and be able to turn it quickly into a design. Sensible sketching. Collaboration is one of the things that comes up in all the sectors. It's really important, not just in spaces, but also online, and providing training to help people collaborate using technology as well as different approaches. Last but not least, open innovation, open source, interoperable file formats, and social visions, which actually provide social benefit through architectural approaches, are very, very important. First vision is about changing the role of architecture. Again, this is very much about what societal benefits can architecture be involved in, and can architecture actually work with brands to see if we can provide better support for that. It's linked into the whole process of rethinking architecture, and there are challenges associated with it, which are how can you create business models which serve society yet still generate profit and attend to commercial responsibility. Also, alignments to brands may not actually allow social benefit because there might be conflict of interest in terms of making profit or doing things for purpose. New building materials based on natural building materials as well as synthesized building materials were a big thing. The challenge with these things is, though, that although these trends exist and they require interdisciplinary collaboration in order for them to happen, the integrity of the materials might not be that great. You need some consistency. And also, if you're working with biological materials, then there are health issues for the workers who are going to be working with those fabricating those materials. So we need to perhaps do some research in these areas in order for that to be facilitated. Everybody wants better modelling software. Problem is that if you want to model materials more accurately, you need better physics engines. And if you want interoperability between file formats, then you need agreement between the vendors. So these are the challenges that maybe we need to do some research around. Maybe vendors need to create APIs that allow better interaction with their file formats and their internal operating systems. 3D visualization is important, but the challenge with this is hardware and costs for head-mounted displays, and the quality of the experience is important, because if you're feeling nauseous but you're not getting high fidelity experience otherwise, then that can be a challenge. So producing 3D technologies that are easy to use and adopt as existing displays, while reducing the cost of those higher fidelity forms of 3D experience, and reducing the learning curve as well. These are going to be important things to do research in. 5 is about rapid prototyping. That includes building 3D printing things right to scales of houses, having innovations that allow you to repurpose architectures, but also perhaps looking at things like robotics and seeing how they can be used to build things, especially through flat pack approaches. The challenge of that is how are you going to have reliable, sustainable materials that work on large scales of 3D printing, and how do you build a 3D printer that's big enough to build a house? It's hard, the hardware for that is going to be a challenging thing to produce on large scales. The actual production cycle itself needs innovating. It's not perfect, but it could do with improvement. The challenge there is how are you going to get architects and construction people to adopt a new process, a new workflow, where they're used to a particular one, even if it's inefficient. That's always going to be a challenge. And if you're going to be building things based on local materials, then it's going to be a challenge if you don't have local materials. Like we're in the middle of a city, for example, or you're in an area where there are no natural resources for you to use in order to generate local materials for building. So those things have to be considered before you go about trying to innovate something that isn't necessarily broke.
Vision 6 focuses on the production cycle and innovation around that. A lot of experts felt that rapid prototyping, especially with regards to innovating the production cycle, was really important. There's a lot more thought going on about the manufacturing side of things generally, and generating smarter strategies relating to materials and life cycles, and also the desire to possibly adopt more robotic forms of fabrication with the use of local materials deployment strategies and exploring the flat pack data center model. The related trends in this area are to do with parametric design tools, enabling robotics implementation, with prototyping and fabrication, and also using BIM as a paradigm shift in architecture. The gaps and challenges relate to the adoption of new production cycle innovations and the actual availability of local materials, and how both these things might present challenges. The related weak signals actually are linked to 3D printing, expansion in scale, material, and in the sectors, and also the industrialization of construction.
And to sketching, the whole thing about taking an idea and sketching it and turning it into a design. Everybody wants to be able to facilitate the creative process really quickly and try out lots of iterations of things. So that's really important. However, the challenge there is how do you get a bit of software to accurately judge the level of precision that's going to be involved in taking the sketch into design. Should you do it roughly, do it precisely? Which factors should you convert and generate precision around? There's a lot of challenges around that, so maybe some new tools, some research needs to be done and experimenting in that particular area. Number 8 is probably one of the biggest areas, which is about collaboration. People need technologies to collaborate, whether it's whiteboards or cloud-connected architecture, or better networks through greater broadband capacity for dealing with large media files. But ultimately, collaboration technologies themselves aren't necessarily guaranteed effective collaborative practices. And also, when people do collaborate, how do you get the right people to collaborate with each other? And last but not least, if you're going to get people to collaborate, and they are the right people, how do you get creativity to be generated that actually leads to the kind of innovation that people want to adopt and pay money for? So collaboration by itself isn't enough. Technologies aren't enough. You need the technologies and the practices and the purpose all to be worked with in an integrated way in order for collaboration to be effective and generate innovation at the end of the day. Vision 9 is about open innovation. This is trying to open up access to interoperable file formats. It's also about getting vendors of applications to maybe cooperate with each other a bit more. But also, if you're going to generate open technologies or open bits of software, then some people are likely to want to take the IP and run off with it and commercialize it. So how do you ensure trust and collaboration in those situations? And lastly, if you're going to get vendors to open up their formats for interoperability, and how is that going to get done? Research needs to be looked into perhaps for developing APIs that allow people to access the inner workings of these bits of software, so different bits of software can talk to each other, and maybe developers can write bits of code, plugins that allow different things to communicate and be interoperable. Vision 10 is about looking at the human-centered aspects of architecture, particularly in using the latest technologies like wearable technologies or motion sensing technologies to look at how human beings are influencing pieces of architecture and how they function within intelligent buildings. Now, there's a lot of trends associated with this, so this is a pretty important area. But the challenge here is in consultation with the communities involved and making sure that they're actually being served. If there's a lack of collaboration between creators and architects in those communities, then you're not going to get the connection or conversation that allows you to get an accurate picture of what's really going on. And the other thing about working in this particular way is that if you're going to come up with a way of working with buildings that can be applied globally, then you need to find a way of globally addressing equipment that's going to be used to build buildings and handle the logistics, especially in crisis areas, for example, or third world countries or less developed countries. The last vision is to do with human-centered spaces again, but it's particularly about using the latest innovations with existing innovations and make sure we don't just dump what we've been using all the time for something that's new and fancy and shiny. Maybe there's a way where the two of them can actually work together and produce something which is more effective. The challenge again with this is that when you are in different kinds of climates, the materials that you use, the buildings that you use, you can't use a single set of standards necessarily globally. So also what needs to be looked at is how you build things in different countries based on logistics. I won't go too much into this, but suffice to say, logistics and sustainability and integrity come up quite a lot when you're trying to apply something to global geographies as opposed to a unique geography. The points of discussion that we're going to have now will include looking back at some of those challenges and those gaps, and also perhaps reflecting a little bit on the live road mapping exercise that we did last week, where we went through the whole cycle of gathering the visions, actually seeing the trends and signals from the algorithms that were generated, and also looking ultimately at research directions that could come out of that, both from a qualitative point of view and from the algorithmic quantitative point of view. So what I'd like to do now is ask David and Victor from Fab Lab to come up and just answer some questions related to what I just presented, and maybe comment on their experience of the live road mapping that we did a little while ago. I'm just going to put the major points back up, and then later on we'll go back to the live road mapping. So looking at the actual desirable futures and the challenges that we saw earlier, of those, which areas do you think you have resonance with, and which ones do you feel maybe you have a different opinion on?
Get the microphone.
Microphone. Yeah, first one is about what do you suggest to fill the architecture gaps that we mentioned. Then we'll have a look at the challenges and how you feel about that, whether you put further considerations for research. So first one's about gaps, and the second one was about looking to bring you back. Right, so on the gaps that you saw, which areas do you feel there were issues with that maybe we need to make some comments on?
I think because we have about 10 minutes to respond all the questions, we might be narrowing down to maybe 3 topics.
Yeah.
So, Victor, I don't know what you think. I'll be inclined to start with the first one because I think it's the most fundamental one. And then probably, yeah, about the 5 because it's going to address the question of technology. Yeah, 8 is also related because there's really probably a big scope to talk about the change in practice as well. Yeah, I'll be about all.
So the first one, number 1, yeah? So I'll put up the time so you can see what it was.
I would respond very quickly about this one. I think there's a fundamental question related to architecture, is the fact that first it's grounded into a deep relation with the physical environment, and it's very, very difficult for the architect to make a transition from that. Not only from a construction and technical point of view, but also from an ethical point of view. We have users that are human beings, and so you know, as opposed to other disciplines, I think we have an ethical weight that is on our shoulder, and this transition makes it really, really, really difficult to embrace the technology we're seeing now. And I think other disciplines are kind of probably used to it for sometimes. I'm referring to design because design has got a smaller scale in some aspects, in a lot of aspects, in a lot of products that comes out of it. So technology like rapid prototyping, 3D printing and things like that are already there for some time. We come in much lower in the industry in terms of bringing in technology. It's very, very recent. And only few architects, I would say, would take the liberty to use it openly. And a lot of them are still very, very close to using technology for ethical point of views, or probably also for technical reasons, because size matters, and the problems that are related to architectures, to architecture are probably a lot more complex to deal with than they are with design or, I don't know, art, probably in some aspects. Victor, I don't know.
Yeah, I want to react about one discussion we had a long time ago with David about technology and craftsmanship. And because architecture was produced for centuries with craftsmen, and now we're arriving in the shift. And the shift, the basic problem or question a lot of architects will think about is how is it going to mix? How it is going to mutate? And I think this was not really shown into that. There was let's say, a way that we could see about the question there where craftsmanship was completely inexistent. So I think this is one of the main challenges.
I agree. So following on to that, I guess that even if we consider that a lot of architects are ready to progress and embrace the technology that is available now, we still have a gap in terms of speaking the same language as the industry, as the users, that have different probably expectations from us. So I guess that design automatically involves the question of aesthetics, whereas architecture has got I think, further considerations that are more practical, probably, related to the user, but also sustainable, from a sustainable point of view. The impact of architecture, I think, is huge. I mean, we noticed that in 2008, after the crisis, there was a huge thing about building architecture, especially in the Middle East, building and building and building. And we noticed that that whole thing fell apart And I guess what technology could bring today in terms of, from a sustainable point of view, is really, really to approach architecture from a more intelligent way, not only from a building and construction point of view, but from really the scope of technology in bringing some very, very specific solutions in making really architecture a lot more intelligent, responsive, almost as any other device like in industrial design would do in a way. So it's bringing the scale of architecture down in some way from what it is. The architecture cannot be considered only as the building, but it goes way beyond that.
I think that's something you'll find in the other industries as well. We talked about technology and story and narrative. And I think what you said, Victor, is right. The whole business of craftsmanship is where a person can tell a story without technology. And if that story or narrative is lost in the technology and the final design of the building, then somehow that building just doesn't quite feel right to actually do stuff in. We'll go on to the next one now, because I just want to finish with that particular comment, which is number 5, which is about rapid prototyping. So your comments on that?
Yeah, I think it goes, one of the shifts is with the teaching that we do together on Fab, and seeing how rapid prototyping is changing the way students conceive and use the material. With rapid prototyping, there is a new arriving of consciousness of students, of weight, of form, of detail, of a lot of things that they were not conscious before. So this is a huge shift. And I think Fab Lab will also change the way people receive technology and accept it, and maybe produce. When we see WikiHouse and other open source projects, it may be one of the trends which will arrive in open source architecture. And I'm not sure it was really into what I saw there.
Okay, so very quickly, with regards to that, what Victor just said is there is a fact that architecture is grounded in two realms. There's the realm of ideas and theories that is very, very strong, and on the other side, there is the realm of technical aspects, construction, and more tangible architecture. It's a fact that in the last 100 years, I guess, theory has been taking a lot of importance in the architecture education, which is good in a way. But a lot of the technical expertise of the architect have also been lost, and we noticed that, for instance, a lot of our students have lost contact with the materiality of architecture and the technical aspect of architecture. And what we're trying to do, we seize this opportunity now that we have with technology is to address again this question of materiality and address the transfer of knowledge from craftsmanship through technology. I think it's important to address it. And we notice the change that it operates within students. I guess going also to the next question maybe, it addresses also the question of continual practice and the articulation between education and practice, I guess.
That's reflected in what you said in the Fab Lab live session last week, where I asked about what's the most fundamental technology that you use everything depends on, and more or less everybody at the university said a pencil. And I thought, oh, I don't think you use looking for background technology. But then actually, for craftsmanship and basic skills and artistry and creativity, you need to work with that. You need to have skills and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, perhaps. But I want to move on to.
What is also amazing is the fact that now we can imagine a new material, not a material like a tissue cut in a CNC machine, and then use it. We will see one of the offices in Barcelona, and use it as a mold for new tires. So that means that it's completely shifting the idea that you cannot invent a material. It's like marketing came into our mind and saying that we were prescriptors. Now we can be, again, people who will invent new things.
Last point before we go and finish up with what your experience was with Fab Lab last week about collaboration.
Yes, again, we noticed that through technology, practices and different roles and actors within the industry tend to converge and quite often blend. Someone in the last panel of experts was mentioning a common language. I think it's becoming key. We're trying to approach it through BIM, but BIM also brings a lot of reaction from different actors within the industry. Namely, a lot of people don't really believe in technology as being the right answer to the architecture problem or the concerns of the user. They tend to think that it segregates the sector, and that basically, it limits the use of technology to only the higher level of businesses. But I guess it addresses also the question that collaboration is becoming key, and that it's literally impossible to approach a project without embracing collaboration nowadays. So it is becoming really, really key that I would say countries in Europe adopt a common language. I refer to myself as architect. Our common language, of course, is drawing. If we have drawing as a common language, it's already a great start. So being able to exchange file formats, like graphic file formats, is a huge step to bridge in terms of integration, I guess.
I would add interdisciplinarity and having people with different skills and work really together. And I think it was not the case before in architecture. Architects were trained to work with engineers, maybe with people who were working on all the heating and so on, the technical engineers. But it was not like saying, I'm going to go to a chemist to invent a new way to do a facade. But now it's the trend that we are seeing in academic anyway.
I think there is more and more like an emergent practice to doing research in architecture. So there is emergent small practices really going up the charts and changing the rules of how architecture should be approached and how a project should be developed. We see a lot of architects reinventing materials, 3D printing buildings, for instance. There's a number of buildings that are being 3D printed, notably in Holland. There's quite a few. Yes, I totally agree that collaboration and interdisciplinary is a key element.
I think you mentioned earlier, David, as well, that collaboration isn't just important as a skill for continuing professional development, but it's also important for students of architecture to develop that skill in academic environments early on. So continuing professional development that was referred to earlier doesn't just relate to training in professional environments, but it also relates to education and how people develop skills in that training environment. I just want to finish on those points there for the time being, and perhaps just as closing comments, just share your experiences of what happened with the Fab Lab last week, where we did the live road mapping, the whole cycle of interviewing people about the current and future situation, their desired aspects of the future of architecture, gathering that information and turning it into scores for the current picture, the future picture, the design picture, then adding them all together to collectively get a view of what's going on, and then using the algorithm to predict where the trends were based on those experts' opinions. And we fed this information back to people and asked, is this your view? And a lot of them agreed, yeah, that represents what we just said. And then I said, here's the algorithm's view of what trends are being implied by what you just said. And we got some interesting feedback. So maybe you want to close by making some comments on your experiences of that?
I think, well, it's a very interesting tool because it can give an insight about what I would say a large group of a certain sector could feel about the needs and probably the prediction of the evolution of this sector, but it can also be applied to individuals as a tool for introspection, to see what are the needs or the dysfunctioning of a small structure or a small business. And from that point of view, I think it's a very flexible tool that can be used in different instances. For me, what it highlighted was a key factor that I noticed in Belgium, at least within the architecture sector. I noticed that CPD, continual practice, is literally non-existent, and it revealed it. And there is a huge demand for that, but there is no offer for it at the moment. It's starting really to develop through the registration board, architecture registration board, but it's only beginning really. So there's a huge demand for that. It revealed that. And the other thing is the collaborations, I think, was the second aspect that it revealed. There was a lack for. And I agree again that interdisciplinary attitudes are very shy at the moment within the architecture sector. It's only emerging small practices, I would say, that would try to go into that direction, but most of the established practices are very close to that to this attitude, I would say.
Okay, well, that actually covers the whole presentation. I think you've seen the visions and the challenges, and you've also seen a live view. And in my experience, doing that live way of road mapping is really effective because you get instant feedback from people. Could I just map your opinion, is this right? And I read it back to them and said, yeah, that's roughly described what I just said. So just based on the numbers. If you combine the results together to present a brief group and then even demonstrate trends and weak signals that they might not have actually said anything about, but if they were inferred, and you can pull out this implicit influences in their thinking, and then it gets shown to them and go, yeah, actually, I was thinking that, but I didn't realise that's what it was. And then for them to then take those trends and signals and then look at how they could be applied in their workplace or in training or in relationships and collaboration, that's the point where it becomes commercially useful. With the numbers, you've got something to base financial decisions on, especially things like funding or project bids and how much pricing you're going to put on various points. So all this has immense implications, not just intuitive views of the sector, but actually how business is conducted in the sector and how it affects society. So I'd like to thank both of you, David and Victor, for offering your opinions. It's been most insightful. I'd like to thank everybody else for
Jazz, we've got a question from the audience.
Oh, sorry, questions. Yeah.
I'm just, it's a very quick comment. I'm just very surprised that I don't see anything about me and you living or working in these buildings. That's which shocks me, I have to say.
That was the very last vision, by the way, to do human-centered approaches. So I didn't get time to go into it, but that was a very strong vision, actually serving people what their needs were, rather than just thinking about what architects thought was a pretty building.
Yeah, and in fact they don't even do pretty building because he didn't seem to be concerned by the aesthetics. And I just wanted to point out that as you're more French in culture, I mean, you might know, of course, of the architect Rasool, and he wrote about a few weeks ago a two-page memoir which really struck me, which was the title was in French, Plus c'est moche, moins on vote, which means that the more it's the ugliest it is, the less you vote. And I think architecture should start thinking about that also, of this responsibility we have in the city.
I tried to address your question in the very beginning when I said that there was a strong ethical role that the architect should play, and I think I meant that. Now, the question of being pretty or ugly, I don't know if you ask it on the first degree or second degree, because from an aesthetic point of view, I think aesthetics is subjective. Something that is ugly for you can be beautiful for me, and vice versa. But ugly, if you talk politically ugly, then yes, I totally agree with you that the political compass should be brought back again into the architecture debate. It disappeared, but it's not only within architecture. The whole political debate is falling apart today. So, but maybe with what is happening now, the architect they've got their say, and maybe they should, and definitely should address this question again. It was a tradition probably in the 70s and 80s where architects were politically engaged, and it hasn't been the question since the star architecture has appeared. And if we talk ugly, maybe this is what you mean. There is ugly and grotesque. Maybe the grotesque is more what we're talking about.
I think what you found that we talked about collaboration, we didn't just mean amongst professionals, but that we also meant collaboration between architects and people in the community to ensure that we're honouring their environment, their culture, and their way of life. So the aspect about establishing effective community engagement, that's another area that collaboration aspect really applies to, consulting with the people that you're going to build for and make sure it's something that actually is going to be something that they live with. Any other questions?
I just want to say something else. When I was talking about technology not being only used to pour concrete earlier on, I was trying to respond and address that question as well. I think technology can help architects to do smarter building, more addressed to the end user, and probably a lot more intelligent than what buildings are at the moment. When I say like only mineral buildings, I think we can go beyond that today with what technology has to offer to architecture. We can literally do living buildings that are literally tailored to the user. So for me, that would be one way to answer your question. I don't know if you want to elaborate, then maybe you can discuss further.
Yeah, I want to share an experience that I just had this morning. I'm teaching also in a unit where 50 students go to help a community to build a space. And there is no money. They are 50. And it was very strange because it's a unit which is called archi-construit, and that means that they really have in mind that they will learn technicality and details and way to build architecture. And they received a brief from one people who was there. It's a space which will change, it will be a park. And the guy said, okay, you have to build this and this and this. And the first thing they did is saying, can't take that as granted. We want to see the community, we want to see people, we want to meet people, and to build and to co-construct the project. There are students who are 20 to 23 years old. That means that it's one of the real trends. It's the new generation who is coming. And they feel maybe more than we do because they are virgin in a way. And they have there is no impact on their working life. It's just they want to do something. So I think it's a huge trend which is coming. It's co-construction.
It's like in the museum world and the art world, when you see these, you're talking about these architects building these cathedrals for them, you don't know how to hang a painting in these buildings. It's not thought for hanging a painting, and at the end it's about art. So it's really
Yes, I think there is really a shift in generation. The new generation is already used for social media and to co-construct a reality. They are in groups, they work together, they share knowledge a lot more than we do. We have that as a tool, but we just learn it. They were born with it. So it was really strange the way they turned the problem in a different way.
Well, that highlights, I think, is a term that's come up in the last few months, and just finish with this point, which is that artists and creators need a sense of empathy with what they're working with in order for them to truly be creative. And it works the other way around too. If they can be creative with their empathy, then that's going to ultimately lead to a resonance between what they do and the people that actually experience what they've actually created. Maybe enough of a resonance for people to want to adopt and experience that in a practical way. Maybe put some money down and pay for those things because they have a resonance with it, because the artists and creators took an empathic approach to find out what was going on and serve that rather than just some fantasy that they had in their heads. So I'm seeing that more and more with architects, especially as Victor said, with young people who are not preconditioned. They go in there and they come from the heart first rather than the head, and that tends to work really, really well. So hopefully what you've seen today is an example of that. We're not just working with numbers, we're working with qualities as well as quantities, and there's that balance between the two. It's like with all beautiful design. If the proportions are just right, then you end up with something beautiful. Thank you, everyone.
In summary, if we look at the trends and weak signals for years 1 and 2, we'll note that the main focus was on new materials and biomimicry, on parametric design tools enabling robotics implementation, prototyping and fabrication, BIM as a paradigm shift in architecture, as well as in visualization. In addition, there was a growing importance of 3D scanning, interdisciplinary collaboration, as well as a rethinking of architecture, with weaknesses and threats particularly focused on the technological overload and lack of interoperability, proprietary corporate buy-up of innovations, as well as cloud data insecurity and vendor locking. Amongst the weak signals, there was a concern and interest around how biology meets technology, how 3D printing expansion can be done in scale, material and sector. There was a focus on industrialization of construction, as well as more immersive visualization. The final aspects of the weak signals to come out of the process was looking at agent-based design, a big focus on improving collaboration and computing infrastructure, as well as also doing some improvement within the area of strategic urbanization, architectural membranes as visual displays, performative building skins, as well as visual programming environments. We'd like to thank you for your time and patience and interest in watching this presentation. If you'd like to get more information about this presentation, then please feel free to contact Carl Smith, the LTRC Director at Ravensbourne, or Rasool, LTRC Researcher from Ravensbourne.